Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we turn our spotlight on Moldova. But here's the thing, that small patch of land between Romania and Ukraine has been tugged, pulled, and sliced apart so many times that its modern identity is less about where it stands and more about who is standing over it. Moldova is a nation whose history reads less like a peaceful chronicle and more like a continuous border dispute. A country trapped between East and West, once the frontier of empires, now the front line of geopolitics. With Russia looming, Romania watching, and the West hesitating, Moldova's future hangs in the balance. Tonight, we ask, can Europe's most fragile state ever find solid ground? Without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
European leaders are looking to send a very strong message to Russia ahead of the country's parliamentary elections in September. They want to dissuade any attempts at interference in the vote and emphasize that Moldova is on the path to becoming an official member of the European community.
Who is behind those attacks is clear to all of us here. These are the same agents of autocracy trying to undermine our democracies everywhere in Europe, and we will show them the power of democracy.
This display of solidarity comes not only ahead of the pivotal elections, but also as reports are coming out about high levels of Russian interference. The Kremlin casts a long shadow over Moldova, as it sees a small European country as a vital part of its so-called sphere of influence. It exerts a lot of pressure on the country through various disinformation campaigns and its presence and control over the breakaway Transnistria region. Moscow also has politicians in its pocket, such as Evgenia Gutul, the governor of the semi-autonomous Caucasia region, who was recently sentenced to 7 years in prison for funneling Russian money into an opposition party.
And now, let's zone in on the East-planning portion of our show. Russia has a long history of interfering with elections in Moldova, especially ever since the country took a pro-EU course. The most recent case of Moscow meddling in Moldovan affairs were the recent presidential elections.
A report by the Polish Institute of International Affairs says that Russian interference in the 2024 Moldovan presidential elections nearly overwhelmed the entire vote. Although the elections ended in the victory of pro-EU Maia Sandu, there are concerns about future votes. In the past, Russia and its local proxies have apparently been eager to resort to vote-buying, disinformation campaigns, and cyber attacks to both destabilize the political and social situation in the country ahead of elections and to influence voters on election day. Although Sandu did win the presidential vote, the election took place alongside a referendum about including EU integration as a strategic goal written into the country's constitution. This referendum went the way of the pro-EU crowd, but only by a slim margin of 0.7%, showing just how deep the roots of Russian propaganda go. One of the goals of these activities, in addition to actually swinging the result, is also to discredit the entire election process. Observers warn that Moldova may not be able to counteract this influence on its own, and may require aid from the European Union to bolster its democratic institutions.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Today, Moldova occupies most of what was once known as the Bessarabia, a fertile corridor that has for centuries been less peaceful homeland and more a thoroughfare for invading armies. Greeks, Romans, Huns, Mongols, Ottomans, you name them, they marched through. Think of it as a geopolitical version of an Airbnb. Everyone checked in, no one respected the house rules, and the security deposit was always stolen. In the 14th century, Moldovans briefly tasted independence under their national hero Stefan the Great, a figure so venerated that every Moldovan child grows up hearing his name. But greatness didn't protect Moldova from reality. By the 16th century, it was under Ottoman Turkish rule, and then came Russia. After the Russo-Turkish War of 1806 to 1812, Eastern Moldova, Bessarabia, was handed over to the Russian Empire. The rest remained under Ottoman sway. Fast forward to 1918, as World War I ended and empires collapsed, Romania seized control of Bessarabia. But the Soviet Union refused to recognize it and, in true Soviet style, created an autonomous Moldovan republic east of the Dniester in 1924, starting a shadow claim to the territory. By 1940, Moscow was done playing shadows. Stalin demanded and got Bessarabia back from Romania. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany gave them cover. Romania tried to claw it back by siding with Hitler, but when the dust of World War II settled, Moldova was firmly in the Soviet camp. In 1947, the modern borders were drawn, and Moldova remained locked inside the USSR until its collapse in 1991. And that brings us to independence. Moldova declared itself free in August 1991. Its fragile democracy was tested right away. Separatism from the Gagauz minority in the south, and far more dangerously from Transnistria on the east bank of the Dniester. Transnistria declared its own republic in 1990, aided by uniformed Russian soldiers who just so happened to be stationed nearby in traditional Kremlin fashion of "we're here forever, deal with it." And the conflict turned hot in 1992 before a ceasefire was struck. To this day, Transnistria remains a frozen conflict, a breakaway region propped up by Moscow, with Russian troops still on the ground despite Moldova never inviting them. This is Moldova's curse. Every attempt at sovereignty has been shadowed by larger powers. For Russia, Moldova is low-hanging fruit, a small, fragile democracy bordering Ukraine. If Ukraine falls, Moldova is next. So when we look at it, we shouldn't just see Europe's weakest link, we should see it as Europe's canary in a coal mine. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Oana Popescu, Director of Global Focus Center. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
So Russia is reportedly deploying a hybrid war strategy to undermine Moldova's upcoming parliamentary elections. How is that being done?
Oh, well, I mean, it's pretty much the recycling of what Russia has already done for the pro-European referendum and the presidential elections, except it is, I think at this point, the difference is it's being done more in the virtual domain under the form of attempts at disinformation and information manipulation, because Moldovan authorities are much better prepared when it comes to attempts at vote buying, direct influence on citizens, and so on and so forth. However, what does remain also, and is much more surreptitious in a way and hard to detect, is the actual creation of so-called fake pro-European parties, if you wish, that under the disguise of a pro-European message actually keep promoting Russia's interests. And that also is not something new. It's just now formalized as such. But in past years, even way back, we already saw a lot of corrupt figures in Moldova, among which the well-known Vladimir Plahodniuk, for instance, pose as a pro-European actor. For quite a while, European governments have cultivated Plahodniuk before he became a fugitive, with a lot of open accusations in court regarding him, and so on and so forth. So he was intensely cultivated because he was trying to brand himself as the only potential pro-European option for Moldova that could also negotiate with Russia in a way that wouldn't trigger Russia's aggression on Moldova because of its pro-European option. I think we have seen the same with the mayor of Chisinau, Ion Ceban, who also for quite a while tried to appear as a very modern, pro-European, pro-democratic figure, while at the same time, in fact, pushing the interests of Russia, or not really, and those of aligned proxies in Moldova. So it's a very complex environment where I think it's very easy to actually dissect the political landscape. You can either have straightforward pro-European, pro-democratic voices that have always championed the same kind of values and cause. Anything else in Moldova that tries to muddy the waters and to brand EU accession as something that is much more complicated, where Russia has a say, and so on and so forth, is actually an obstacle on Moldova's pro-European path.
Right, so we'll go back to that individual in a second, but going back to the political system, how does the campaigning look like in Moldova compared to other new democracies?
Well, I think, if we compare to new democracies, they all face their challenges. Let's just think of how complicated things are everywhere around the EU neighborhood, and from Serbia to Georgia. But Moldova faces these additional issues that very much have to do with a complex identity, a country that has multiple minorities, not least the Gagauz one, not just the Russian one, that follow diverse leaders, where the central government and ruling coalition don't necessarily manage to reach through influential and credible voices, and that is in part the fault of the current leadership, because I think they have been more comfortable reaching out to like-minded populations, not necessarily to those that were on the opposite side, to try and rally the whole population around. So it's a very fragmented political and electoral environment. It's an environment where people are bombarded daily with messages that basically say war is on the doorstep. It's a permanent threat. If you want to avoid it, then you need to make sure you don't anger Russia. There are messages that portray European accession as fake itself. They basically say the EU is not going to deliver, you're not going to become a member. These are just the interests of the political leadership that is sold to Western actors. And it's an environment where resources are also scarce. However, I must say, one of the very relevant things that Moldova has done was setting up this strategic communication center that is tasked with countering the hybrid attacks and information manipulation. And I think genuine efforts have taken place both on an institutional level throughout the past couple of years, to reach out to the rank and file, to reach out to even to the vulnerable populations at the grassroots. And politically, I think the Action and Solidarity Party has learned a bit from last year's experience that they need to campaign more door to door. They need to reach out to people, but still that is not being done to the extent that it should be. And part of it, like I said, is that resources are scarce, and it's a very challenging context.
Right, and in what ways are exile oligarchs like Ilan Shor being used, or perhaps positioning itself to influence Moldova's political scene?
Ilan Shor has been the disruptive voice over the recent years. He has essentially, if you want to simplify, taken Vladimir Plahotniuk's place as Russia's outpost to Moldova. And the way that Ilan Shor and his party have tried to influence people was to, first and foremost, use their grievances, use their the poverty that Moldova has constantly faced. It is still the poorest country in Europe. It has benefited a lot from European funding and even American support, Romanian support, even Poland has contributed. So partners have been helping. The government has been trying to take measures to increase resilience and economic performance. However, that is structurally difficult, especially in times of regional instability and constant undermining by Russia. So, of course, there will be legitimate grievances from the citizens, and against this background, it is easy to reach out to people and to tell them, on the one hand, that what the government is selling is just illusions, and EU accession is utopia, and at the same time to try and deliver to them even small but immediate benefits, the mirage of either small amounts of money that can buy your vote, or indulgence from local authorities that are loyal to Moscow, or at least to exploit people's fear of war and to tell them that if they vote for the current government, the risk of war increases, and if they vote against it, then that decreases. It is a way of simplifying things and really pushing on people's fears. And that's been done with a lot of money, money that's been coming directly or indirectly from the Kremlin via the Shore network. And we already know from last year that this is a vast, expansive network. If I am not mistaken, right now there are hundreds, even more than 1,000 open cases in Moldovan courts that have been prosecuted. This is a well-organized system that resembles the direct sales mechanism, with a pyramid, with feedback from people who have been dealing with the population directly, trying to map out the population's loyalties across regions and various places, and to identify who can be a reliable anti-government voter, who is a swing voter, how to reach them. So this is something that's been constantly perfected by Russia through Ilan Shore's money and network of influence.
All right, and like you mentioned, there's a lot of resources being poured into it, but why does Russia remain so fixated on Moldova? What historical regional factors explain this kind of persistent interference?
Well, on the one hand, Russia's essential interest is that no country that was part of the Soviet Union and gained its independence from Russia manages to become a consolidated democracy closely associated with the European Union or NATO. We see this materialize in war in Ukraine, and the same justification underlies the war at the end of the day, stopping Ukraine from coming closer to Western partners, stopping Ukraine from being a democracy. The same are the stakes in Moldova. Obviously, the country is smaller. The strategic stakes are less important than in Ukraine, but there is a very symbolic dimension to it. If Moldova makes it to elect again a pro-democratic government, a pro-European government that has a parliamentary majority comfortable enough to make all of those decisions that will be needed in its EU accession process, then that's a major loss for Russia. It will mean that it hasn't been able to influence a country that small and that vulnerable. Moldova has a separatist entity on its territory, Transnistria. It hosts Russian troops. What would it look like for Russia in the context of its struggle for regional dominance if it doesn't manage to overturn the result of elections? It already lost the first battle last year. It really cannot afford to lose the battle this year, which influences Moldova's path even more, because these are the national elections. The stakes are in a way similar to the ones that Russia had with regard to elections in Romania at the end of last year and beginning of this year. And it was the same. If Romania managed to elect a pro-democratic president, despite all the pressure coming from Russia to elect a Russian puppet, that was a very hard hit for Moscow, which was hoping to undermine EU unity as well. So the stakes in Moldova are primarily that Russia needs to score a victory in the region and to show that it still calls the shots. And obviously there's an additional element with a weak Moldova. Ukraine itself is more vulnerable. The region itself is more vulnerable because Russia can exert various types of pressure through Moldova.
All right, thank you so much for helping us unpack this very complicated political field. And thanks for being with us on Eastern Express. Cheers.
Thank you again.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Ukraine's government is set to allow men aged between 18 and 22 to leave the country. Since the start of the invasion, Ukrainian men of these age and up to 60 have been prohibited from leaving Ukraine.
Ukraine's cabinet of ministers is working on new regulations that will allow Ukraine's youngest adult men to travel abroad. The new legislation will also concern Ukrainian men of the ages in question who are currently living abroad. Martial law will remain in force across Ukraine as the country continues to defend itself against Russian attacks. The decision is expected to be very well received by the Ukrainian population, as they have been concerns over Kiev mobilizing men below the age of 25. There are currently no signs that the government intends to lower the age of conscription, despite pressure from its Western partners, including the United States.
India is preparing to modestly reduce its import of Russian oil. The decision comes after weeks of mounting U.S. political and economic pressure.
Since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, India has become one of Moscow's most important clients when it comes to selling oil. India currently accounts for around 37% of Russia's total oil export. This trade serves as a critical revenue stream to upkeep the Russian war machine. According to anonymous sources cited by Bloomberg, state-owned and private refineries and oil processors plan to trim their daily purchases to between 1.4 and 1.6 million barrels from 1.8 million barrels. The move comes ahead of doubled US tariffs on Indian imports. The Trump administration has publicly criticized India for its eagerness to purchase Russian oil, which has lessened the impact of Western sanctions on Moscow. Nonetheless, observers believe that the modest reduction being introduced by India signals that the country is very reluctant to cut down on its economic ties with the Russians.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.